1998. Watsonville, California. Cold fog covering the hills. 5:42 a.m. In the damp silence before sunrise, something improbable happened. A single strawberry ripened ahead of its time, glowing like a ruby lost in the gray dawn. A solitary fruit, too red, too alive, too bold for that season. Most would have walked past it without noticing. But Emiliano Reyes, freshly arrived from Mexico, thin as one who had crossed deserts and crushed expectations, stopped before that small miracle of the earth. To the other workers walking behind him, it was just a ridiculous scene. The scrawny immigrant standing, motionless, staring at a strawberry as if before a divine revelation. Look at the skinny wetback, talking to a fruit. One of them murmured, before bursting into the muffled laughter that often springs from everyday prejudice. No one understood Emiliano's demeanor. He was too polite, too quiet, too observant. He always carried an ancient weariness on his shoulders, but his eyes shone with a strange kind of concentration, as if he saw layers of the world that others ignored. The truth was, Emiliano wasn't looking at the strawberry. He was analyzing the soil, the humidity, the dew pattern, the subtle slope of the land. He absorbed details that would go unnoticed even by the most experienced farmers. And he did it with a silent discipline that both intrigued and annoyed. Every morning, even before the official start of work, he repeated his own ritual. He would kneel at specific points in the plantation, touch the soil, smell the surface, rub his thumb over the texture of the sand, and write something in a small brown notebook. His movements were slow, methodical, almost abstract. To the small town, it made no sense at all. He's weird, too skinny, too shy. Won't last even one harvest. The label skinny wetback spread quickly, not just as a nickname, but as a social sentence. Emiliano was treated as someone inferior, predictable, disposable, and his quietness only fueled the mistaken interpretations. But while they laughed at him, Emiliano took measurements with wooden sticks he marked himself. He left small stones in specific places, studied the variation of shadows throughout the day, observed minute details on the leaves, as if deciphering a secret code. To the others, it was a pure waste of time. To him, it was the foundation of a decades-long plan. Working on the brink of poverty, living in a tiny room behind a hardware store, Emiliano daily faced laughter, disdainful glances, conversations interrupted when he passed. Even so, he kept his head down and maintained a humble posture, not out of submission, but out of strategy. He knew that to build something monumental, he would first need to disappear within the routine. One afternoon, weeks after his arrival, while noting details near a row of plants, two older workers passed him, laughing loudly. Look at him, writing again. Must be writing a letter to the president, or counting how many times we work for him. Emiliano raised his face, not with anger, but with serenity, a serenity so profound it bothered the men even more. I'm just observing, he replied, his voice low and gentle. The phrase, in its simplicity, was interpreted as arrogance, as audacity, as if a skinny, silent immigrant had no right to observe anything. But inside Emiliano, something was growing. He knew the plantation was suffering silently. Small anomalies in the soil indicated a future drastic drop in productivity, a collapse no one had yet perceived. That's why he measured. That's why he took notes. That's why he worked in silence. That night, under the dim light of an improvised lamp, Emiliano reviewed his scribbled pages. Hand-drawn charts, numbers, calculations, patterns of thermal variation, humidity, density. Everything indicated the same thing. The farm was cultivating strawberries as if the soil were eternal, and it wasn't. The managers ignored obvious signs. The workers didn't notice the changes. The town prided itself on remaining the same every year. But Emiliano saw the future approaching like a silent storm, and yet he spoke little. He waited, he observed, he prepared. With each dawn, he repeated his ritual. With each note, he rediscovered the same pattern. With each veiled humiliation, his determination grew to prove, not to others, but to the land itself, that something could be transformed. When winter arrived, bringing light frosts and even colder mornings, Emiliano intensified his secret work. He spent hours observing the way the leaves drooped, the rate at which they dried, the irregular distribution of nutrients on the soil's surface. It was during one of these observations that the farm manager approached, annoyed. "What do you think you're doing? Are you wasting time?" Emiliano took a deep breath before answering. "The soil is getting weak." "What did you say?" "It's losing strength. If it continues like this, you'll have big problems in a few years." The manager laughed. He laughed loudly. He laughed with disdain. He laughed like someone who knows everything and would never admit that someone like Emiliano could know more. "The soil is great. You're the one who doesn't understand anything." But Emiliano merely smiled faintly, put his notebook in his pocket, and returned to work. His humility confused people. His patience was almost embarrassing. His silence seemed like stubbornness. No one imagined that behind that skinny, underestimated immigrant, the greatest strawberry producer in California was emerging. It was just the beginning. And when the truth came, it wouldn't be slow. The winter of 1999 left Watsonville covered in a harsh silence. The fog seemed denser than in previous years, and the damp smell of the earth was almost metallic at dawn. While the town retreated to the slow rhythm of reduced harvests, Emiliano did the opposite. He intensified his routine. He woke before everyone else, walking through the dormant rows of plants with light, almost reverent steps, as if entering a temple. Each morning, he repeated movements that the workers already knew and judged without understanding, kneeling, touching the soil with both hands, smelling the air, observing the dew at length, marking small spots with stones, scratching the sand with the tip of a branch. It was always the same, a silent choreography that seemed like madness in the eyes of the community. "Doesn't he ever get tired of this?" a female worker asked once. "He only gets tired of talking," another replied, laughing. The repetition became a joke, and the more it repeated, the more it bothered them. The label "skinny wetback" gained traction. It started as a joke, became a habit, and ended as a way to exclude him. The town saw him as someone too strange to belong, too ambitious for his own good, too disciplined for someone of his background. And yet Emiliano continued, silent, attentive, unbeatable. In the second year, the first signs of what only he had been able to see began to emerge. Faint spots on the soil, small nutritional deficiencies, some rows with uneven development. No early strawberries that year, a detail that for Emiliano was as symbolic as the first. He noted everything, as always. The morning mist accumulated on his notebooks, leaving the pages wavy. The numbers became dense, the projections more complex. His hands already bore calluses from working the harvest during the day and writing calculations at night. But no one knew this. For everyone, he was just the scrawny immigrant who didn't know his place. "What are you writing so much there?" asked one of the supervisors, curious and at the same time suspicious. "Just routine logs," Emiliano replied, with that same calm tone that seemed to irritate everyone. The truth was, he was writing much more than routines. He was writing the future. During the spring of 2000, the farm faced its first real problem. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw outside attention, but enough to create anxiety among the owners. Some areas simply weren't responding to fertilizer as before. Growth was slowing. Water seemed to evaporate too quickly. The farmers blamed the weather. The manager blamed the labor. The workers blamed bad luck. But Emiliano, observing in silence, knew that this was just the beginning. The variations confirmed every calculation he had been making since 1998. He could have warned them. He could have said, "I know exactly what's happening." He could have prevented the upcoming losses, but he had chosen to wait. Elegance wasn't silence out of cowardice. It was silence out of strategy. He needed to understand everything before revealing anything. He needed to master every inch of that land before speaking aloud. Over time, His discipline began to stir deeper irritation. The fact that he never defended himself, never confronted, never broke his pattern, made some feel that he thought he was better than everyone else. One worker even said, "He looks at the land as if he owns it." Another replied, "One day they'll send that scrawny guy away, just to stop him from thinking too much." But fate had other plans. In 2001, Emiliano asked for something no one expected: permission to take care of a small abandoned lot at the back of the property. It was a bad, forgotten area, with soil too hard, too compacted, too dry. No experienced farmer would waste time there. The manager laughed when he heard the request. "What for? Nothing grows there." "I can try to make it grow," Emiliano replied. There was silence. One of those uncomfortable silences, carrying incredulity, and also a certain disdain. "Do what you want. Just don't get in the way of the rest." The authorization was granted more out of boredom than confidence. It even seemed like an inside joke among the workers. The scrawny guy was finally going to have a space to play farmer, and it was precisely on that condemned piece of land that Emiliano began the most important stage of his plan. He began by manually removing the top layer of hardened soil. He spent hours digging with his bare hands, breaking up clods, sifting dry remnants of old roots. Then he spread small portions of natural compost that he himself prepared in buckets, hidden near the abandoned car where he used to rest. In anyone's eyes, that was absurd. Who would spend months trying to make strawberries grow in dead soil? But Emiliano didn't care about anyone's opinion. His focus was on the cycle of the earth, on the slow and deep recovery that he knew would take years. It was the beginning of reconstruction. In early summer, when the other workers laughed, saying his lot looked more like a plant cemetery than an experimental plantation, Emiliano just continued his process. He watered with calculated precision, observed the shadows, adjusted small inclines with pieces of wood, created tiny channels to control water flow. And he never explained anything. This deeply irritated those who tried to mock him. "Hey, you fresh off the boat, you really think you're going to change this land?" "The land changes when we talk to it," Emiliano replied, smiling. The phrase became a joke for weeks, but within that small abandoned area, a secret was being born, still invisible, still silent, still too fragile to be understood. Time passed. Winter returned. Workers changed, arrived, left. The city remained small and distrustful, but Emiliano remained. Gradually, something unexpected began to emerge. Small areas of the reclaimed plot had a different coloration. Darker shades, more vibrant textures. When he touched the soil, he felt it was looser, airier, with moisture more evenly distributed. It was a minimal sign, ridiculously minimal. But to him, it meant everything. The truth was being confirmed. He had been right from the start. In 2002, something even more significant happened, something only Emiliano noticed. On an especially cold morning, he found a tiny sprout in the left corner of the abandoned plot. A solitary light green leaf, almost timidly inclined. It seemed like a gesture of courage from the soil itself, as if the earth were saying, "I still can." Emiliano knelt before it, as if before a miracle. He didn't touch it. He didn't photograph it. He didn't tell anyone. He just watched, silent, as he had with the first strawberry in 1998. The following years deepened the contrast between what the city thought of him and what he was building. People believed Emiliano was a mediocre, reserved worker, incapable of real ambition, a man destined to always live in the shadows of others' plantations. But he knew that was just a shell. The truth was growing underneath, like an invisible root. And when it finally became visible, it wouldn't be small. It would be impossible to ignore. The year 2005 began with an uncomfortably clear sky over Watsonville. The air seemed static, almost suspended, as if California itself were holding its breath. The entire region faced a growing problem: Strawberry productivity had been falling year after year, slowly and silently, just as Emiliano had predicted from the first day he touched that soil. Farmers once confident, now spoke in hushed tones. Supervisors discussed troubling numbers. The community, restless, sought culprits. And amidst this growing anxiety, there was Emiliano, the skinny immigrant, who still walked with the same humble posture as always, still assessing the plantation with keen eyes, still jotting everything down in notebooks no one had ever seen inside. The difference was that now, something was flourishing. After years of meticulous work, the abandoned plot, that piece of ground considered useless, began to transform before Emiliano's watchful eyes. First discreetly, then more evidently. The soil came to life, sprouts emerged. Small white flowers bloomed in harmonious patterns. The earth's breath had changed, and all of it was born in cruel contrast to the rest of the farm, where the plants were increasingly fragile, sparser, more susceptible to the unpredictable weather. The truth was beginning to reveal itself, but still silent, still unwitnessed, still invisible to all who passed too quickly through the plantation corridors. In 2006, during one of the annual inspections, an agricultural engineer hired by the owners walked through the farm, making concerned notes. He frowned at each row, argued with the manager, pointed out flaws. Tension accumulated in the air like the harbinger of a storm. But when he approached the plot, Emiliano cared for alone, he stopped abruptly. "Wait, what happened here?" The manager shrugged, uninterested. "Oh, that's just the corner where that immigrant takes care of his own ideas. It's not important." The engineer knelt, touched the soil, analyzed its texture, and smelled the earth like an expert recognizing something rare. "But this is impossible. Who did this?" The manager seemed irritated by the astonishment. "What do you mean impossible? It's just dirt." The engineer stood up, staring at the manager as if speaking to someone who had just stepped on diamonds thinking they were common rocks. "The soil in this area is the best I've seen in years. It's richer, more balanced, healthier than the rest of the entire farm. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." The manager was speechless. For the first time he felt ashamed of not knowing how to respond. And at that instant, Emiliano, observing from afar with his usual calm, realized that the time for revelation was approaching, not out of vanity, but because the earth spoke for itself. The following weeks were dominated by meetings, discussions, technical visits, in-depth evaluations, and inevitably, all led to the same point. Who restored this soil? Who created these natural channels? Who understood the hydrothermal cycle before anyone else? The name always emerged as an uncomfortable whisper: Emiliano Reyes. Some reacted with disbelief, others with shame, others with silence. But no one could deny the fact. The skinny immigrant, underestimated for almost a decade, had seen what was happening before everyone else. And more than that, he had started correcting the problem by himself. When they finally called him to explain what he had done, Emiliano entered the room with the same demeanor as always. Downcast gaze, intertwined hands, a serenity that was perplexing. "Mr. Reyes," said the agronomist, "did you know that your plot is now the most productive on this farm?" Emiliano took a deep breath. "I just took care of the land, as it asked to be cared for." There was silence, a long, disconcerting, almost sacred silence. But no one was prepared for what he would reveal next. Emiliano placed not one but 10 notebooks on the table, each filled with calculations, cycles, observations, diagrams, predictions. They were years, entire years, of solitary study, a silent science, built while everyone laughed at him. The engineer opened the notebooks carefully, like someone opening a reliquary. Page after page, it became clear. Emiliano had not only predicted the soil collapse,
He had developed an unprecedented methodology to restore worn-out land, adapted to the Californian climate and strawberry cultivation. A methodology that could save not only that farm, but the entire region. The impact was immediate. Extraordinary meetings, invitations from cooperatives, farmers from other towns wanting to hear his ideas, a public university asking to see his calculations, and most importantly, a recognition that was long overdue. The man everyone despised had understood the land better than any hired expert. Public perception shifted abruptly. The following years were a whirlwind of transformations. In 2008, Emiliano officially took over the complete regeneration of various areas of the farm. In 2010, he began leasing small neighboring plots with his own money. In 2012, his first commercial crops surprised buyers. In 2014, his techniques were already a regional benchmark. And in 2017, 2 decades after being called a skinny wetback, Emiliano launched his own agricultural brand, a sustainable strawberry producer based on the principles he conceived alone in silence, while being ridiculed. What was once a joke became a headline. Mexican immigrant revolutionizes strawberry production in California. And when in 2021 he was officially named the largest strawberry producer in California, the entire town, the very one that had laughed at him, attended the ceremony. There was pride, there was astonishment, there was regret, but none of that changed the essential fact. He won without ever raising his voice. He proved everything without ever confronting anyone. He transformed the land, and without realizing it, also transformed everyone's perception of who he was. In his acceptance speech, Emiliano walked onto the stage with his usual simple demeanor. There was no ostentation, no vanity, just a man looking at the audience with the serenity of someone who had always known the destiny he carried within him. He took a deep breath and said, "I was never the strongest, I was never the smartest, but I was always the one who listened to the earth with the most patience, and it never deceived me." The audience rose to their feet. It was a long, emotional, almost redemptive applause. Many cried, some apologized, others simply bowed their heads, remembering the laughter they had once shared. But Emiliano held no grudges. He knew that the greatest victory is to transform the soil and the hearts of others at the same time. Years later, when children from the region's schools visited his fields, they walked among endless rows of glistening strawberries under the afternoon sun. Teachers told the story of the immigrant who knew how to listen to the earth, the immigrant who arrived alone, faced prejudice, worked in silence, planned for decades, and changed everything. Parents told the story to their children. Children told it to future farmers, and the story grew like a root deepening through generations. Emiliano's legacy was not just producing strawberries, it was teaching that silent discipline can move worlds. It was proving that humility is not weakness, it is strategy. It was showing that when no one believes in you, there is still a force that can believe the earth itself. If this story touched you, continue following other narratives of immigrants who transformed entire worlds with simple, silent, and persistent gestures. Stories like this remind us that prejudice may try to erase someone, but it cannot erase their truth. Keep exploring these inspiring journeys. You never know which one might change your own life.